Let me just welcome everybody. I want to make a conscious effort to go beyond the buzzwords and get real about what it takes to lead cybersecurity at the edge of chaos. We're going to get into this theme, the edge, with a fun announcement coming up towards the end of this session. Something about the edge. If you haven't, seen or heard it yet, you will. So I believe every CISO and CIO and cybersecurity leader deserves a space where strategy, resilience, and real-world leadership get the spotlight they deserve. I think we'll have fun talking about technology, but this is not a tech-obsessed conversation. So let's get into it. I'd like to take a minute and just thank you, Steve. You're no stranger to our community. You too have your own podcast. I think it's off the CISO series. What's the name of it in particular?
Defense in Depth.
Defense in Depth. So between two podcasts, I like this dynamic. Podcasters, I like this dynamic. You're the former CISO of Levi's and have quite a background and reputation for your generosity and your support of our community, and I appreciate that. So with the background out of the way, I'd like to just jump right. And I'm Steve Tout. If you are I'll give a brief introduction to myself. I am not a CISO. I'll just get that elephant out of the room right away. But I've worked around a lot of CISOs. I've worked with them and for them and supported them, maybe more as a either a hired hand or an emotional support animal or whatever the case may be. And I, take the role now of maybe analyst, friend, supporter of this community. And just providing perspective and a space to have honest dialogue. With that out of the way, I'd like to just jump right into the title. I think what everybody came for here was the awesome. I think you mentioned it was a maverick statement, but it came from you, Steve, not me. And so I want to shift into the context and start to unpack this headline about the co-morbid poisoning of the CISO role. So let's jump into this, Steve. What does this mean in plain terms to you? And how is it actually playing out behind the scenes from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Appreciate the opportunity to chat with you and looking forward to this. When you put a LinkedIn post out there, you were talking about, what was going wrong in the industry. That was where, when I was responding to your post in my own mind, I was looking at, are there particular things that I can point to, right? Is it an issue with the CISO? Is it an issue with a practice? Is it an issue with, what? And that's where, in my own mind, over the last couple of years, in talking to all of my peers and looking at the industry, I was thinking about more like a doctor. And I'm like, there's a whole set of circumstances here that are interlocked, that are creating this situation. And so this is where I got really frustrated. And I simply said, it's like co-morbid, that you can fix one thing, but if you don't fix enough of them, the other ones just, interleave on top of that. And we got where we were today. And that's what caused me to say, I think it's a co-morbid exercise, which seems a little odd, but that was the genesis where we go, yeah, there's an undermining of the CISO, so to speak, right? Because of a set of comorbid circumstances that we're going to talk about.
On the outside, and we're going to unpack this and some of the other symptoms in going from this medical analogy into more relatable diagnoses, if you will, that we see and we feel, because our friends, our peers, our colleagues are in these roles. But I wonder, before we get into the messy middle, you were at RSA last week, and in our prep, you kind of made some real observations about the state of our industry. So I know you're still decompressing a bit from that experience, but we can start thinking more systemically about what needs to change. So there's no, to address this revolving door that, the 2-year, 24-month tenure that most CISOs have. So Steve, what do you think, comparing what happened at RSA, if you have some general impressions about that as a reflection of our industry, where it's at, And then, what does it say about our industry when so many CISOs feel like ER doctors, always reacting, rarely in control?
Okay. You threw that one in there. I see where we go. So let me take it in order. My impressions of RSA. Okay. Ever since COVID, RSA for the last few years, I consider is like a giant family reunion. Okay. For 3 or 4 years, we're not touching base. So everybody's coming back, saying hi, catching up as a family, the entire industry consolidating around that. This year, something like 30,000 people. We're back. I would say we're back as far as all of us there, which is good. Excuse me. But here are the undertones that I was picking up. While everybody is happy to see each other, okay, the industry as a whole is in consolidation, meaning what you're seeing with marketing and sales and all of the energy at RSA and on the floor was people will say, look at the enthusiasm, look at how healthy the market is. But what you're seeing and what I'm seeing is there's not enough revenue to sustain the market. There are so many new companies out there, right? Vying for attention and money. There are so many existing ones. The security industry as a whole, the CISOs, are seeing consolidation of their roles. They're seeing the downsizing of the organizations, right? So there's this pressure. And fundamentally, the budgets are not able to sustain the growth. And this year, we were talking about the fact that CISOs are not necessarily VIPs. We are, right? They all want to talk to us to sell product. But this farming concept that we have about being, you know, doing it in a way that is kind of culturally appropriate. I would say that veneer of civilization has come off. And the CISOs feel like we're big game and there's big game hunting going on. Okay. And that there's a desperation that you're seeing in the industry as a result of all of this marketing and sales trying to gain attention for the limited dollars. And I really got a lot of feedback this year, which was you walk into those environments and it's very noisy and people are lining up to talk to you, right? And they are hunting now. They are just really coming at you hard. And so the civility component is not there. And that's really hard because for CISOs, that is not a good place to be, right? We can't sustain that. And then to your second part, which is to the degree that we are seeing this, is how is a CISO viewing, right, their role? And it was something you and I talked about is, are we like lawyers? Are we like CFOs? Okay. Or are we like doctors? How do we see the role progressing? And what I've observed, and again, it gets back to the COVID more nature here, is that we operate like emergency room doctors more than anything else. It's probably the closest that I can have as to what we do. And then the question is why? Why, Steve, did you pick that? Okay, as a profession. And I say, because if you look at our roles, how much control over our destiny do we actually have? Right? Most folks, right, when they go to work or they wake up, I say, you got 85, 90% control of your destiny. You know what you're going to do, you know how you're going to get up, right? You're going to go to work, you know what the work is, you know what your metrics are for success, and you have general control. And there are things that disrupt it. You wake up sick, right? Or you're a parent and your child's sick and you're going to be late, right? Or the child gets sick and you have to pick them up from daycare, or you go to work and there's a transition in the company of some sort, and you're temporarily out of control. And there's a lot of anxiety that's associated with that.
I think
Right?
I think that's key, and we're going to unpack that. You outlined this, in a very relatable way. That word though you use temporary. I wonder like how many folks get into this role and temporary turns into a permanent condition of anxiety and stress. On another podcast that me and a friend of mine, John Donovan, host, the Candid CISO, in season 1, we saw a lot of burnout conditions in the CISO role, right? And I think that has to do with, hey, this role is in a very stressful situation. So, yeah, I wonder, as you think about this, you kind of outlaid this, structure of the 3 external forces shaping CISO experiences expertly, right? You've been there, and you kind of see these systemic pressures. So, like, break down these 3 external forces of um, things that are outside of the CISO's role. Part one. So part one of the question, and then can you, like, think through with us, how can we make sure that the anxiety is temporary and doesn't become more of a operating model, um, of constant putting out fires, even though that seems to be what it is, right? Is it possible to get to a place where we have a bit more structure?
Yeah. And you introduced another analogy here, which was firefighting.
Hmm.
And I'm going to take a moment here and say I have oftentimes said we were like firefighters, that the security program and CISOs are like firefighters, right?
Hmm.
Because we would have been policemen or other form of emergency response teams, because we come in to put out the fire, right? If there's a breach or an incident, we come in and we put the fire out. And they say, and historically, for 20, 30 years, we've done this, right? And we're heroes. And people acknowledge us as heroes, like firemen. Congratulations. It was great that you went in there and put out the fire. And they say, but what you see is, even from that analogy, there's something wrong with that, which was a fireman now, when they have a fire and they arrive, okay, and they go into the building or they approach it, is their job to put out the fire? And the answer is not anymore. Their job is to make sure that there is nobody in that building that needs to be saved. And those are what I call the lines of business, right? So you have to save the lines of business, individuals. And after you get them out, then you can go worry about saving the larger business, putting the fire out. But it's a secondary issue. Okay. And I go, so since you introduced that, I just want to say CISOs, our responsibility, right, is not to protect everything equally. It's to make sure that the lines of business that are critical to us exist. Okay. That's one stage. Now let's go to, now as a CISO in my operating role. And if we look at it from the what do I have control over, kind of breaks down this way. I say you have, as a CISO, anywhere between 25 and 33% control of your destiny, not the 85 to 90. And I go, and here's why. 33% of your destiny is in your hands because it's your budget. You've negotiated with your executive team. You have a budget. With that budget came deliverables. You're laying some new technology. You're doing some process improvement, security awareness training, whatever it is. Okay. And you're trying to operate against that over the course of the year because you've set deliverable times and you've got a certain amount of people, process, and technology to do that. Say the next third, when you walk in, is how the bad guys are attacking your perimeter and the successes that they're having. I have to react to that on a daily basis. If they have success, a social engineering attack, a phishing attack, a vulnerability exploit, I have to address that. I have no control. I have to do that at the expense of everything else, right? Got to save the business. The other third, I say, is what the lines of business are doing, right? When I was at Levi's, I used to say the business was there to sell jeans. It was not there to practice cybersecurity. And so the lines of business in selling more jeans are being very creative, right, in how they do that. And they're not necessarily coming to me and asking for permission for how they do that. And so I have to react to the realities of the business growing. Okay, that's a reactive front. You find out tomorrow that they've bought another SaaS application or they're throwing some more stuff in the cloud, and you have to now embrace the sprawl right? And embrace them, can't prevent. So I go, so when I walk in the morning, 2/3 of the time I'm going to be reacting. And if you're heavily regulated, well, I say you only got 25% because the regulators and the audits are coming in and telling you what you have to do, which case 25% of your time is what you own. And the 75 is in a pure reactive mode. We say that together because now look at emergency room doctor. And now we're going to talk about the comorbid challenges here, which was an emergency room doctor does not get to pick the patients that are coming in. Okay. And he can't take forever on every patient. He has to take what's given to him. He has to rely on his expertise. He has to rely on his critical thinking skills. Okay. He has to go into kind of a crisis management mode to be able to keep the patient alive, not necessarily put the patient back together. Okay. And then move on to the next patient and then in remediation later do those things. And if you think about it that way, that's more and more of what CISOs are doing because the business has unreasonable expectations, right? The bad guys are attacking. Your executive team is changing what they want. And what do we do for doctors in the emergency room? Well, we only let them work 12 or 14 hours. They're forced to take breaks, okay? There's an expectation as to what success looks like. How do you operate where you're just trying to make sure that the patients are surviving, right? And getting ready for the next one, muscle memory, all the rest. And so I go, that for a lot of us, as we're having these conversations, is a better analogy. And yet we as a profession, how we practice cybersecurity and the profession of a CISO are now reaching that stage where we need to establish that type of understanding of the role so that we can describe what success might look like.
You make a lot of great points, and I mean, you've framed one dimension very clearly about the things that are out of the control of a CISO. As we dig even further around the comorbid conditions, and I'm glad we're able to do this, right? Because at first it seems a bit, like we are being pejorative in terms of like the environment or the role itself. But when you get rational and you think realistically about what's really happening, you've described 75% of the role where you don't have control, but that's not the end of the CISO's problems. You have other dynamics as well, like role compression. CISOs often don't, quote unquote, have a seat at the table, or they're not strategically aligned with their board's expectations and or have an ability to have that frequent alignment conversation with them. There's another problem, which I think we often overlook. We don't hear a lot about strategic amnesia, how we treat, like how CISOs are treated as technical operators, not strategic leaders. There's burnout, being overtooled and undervalued, accountability without control. I mean, there's a host of things here that compound further on top of the ones that you've just described. So, you've talked a little bit about what success looks like. Is there, a performance trap here? If like role compression, for example, and how it's misunderstood as individual failure. When everything is visible but nothing is owned, right? How do you lead? Like, how do you begin to think about leading through the situation versus just being a technical operator?
Yeah. And this is where when I was talking about briefly, when I said, look, cybersecurity is 35 or 40 years old as a
Mm-hmm.
practice. The
Mm-hmm.
profession of a CISO, okay, similar to a doctor or a lawyer, a CPA, is maybe 20 years old, okay? And the role itself is still adapting. That's what we realize is we're going from what I call tool jockeys, right? Technical tool jockeys reporting to the CIO because it was a technical job, more and more to understanding we basically are providing insurance policies to the lines of business. And so now we're having these conversations around business risk, not technical risk. We're having these conversations around business impact analysis, not securing the company with technical controls. And so as this maturation of what a CISO is to the larger community, right? And going through these painful changes and understanding of what we can do, I think to a certain extent, we're not adapting. And I would describe it this way to you, Steve's view of the world, right? If I look at CISOs, I say most CISOs are technical CISOs. They believe their job is to secure the company, right? I'm going to introduce as much friction into an efficient business process as I deem necessary and tell you how to do your job so we don't get breached. Okay. And I have auditors that are telling me here's all the technical controls that I need in order to be able to meet the audits against whatever the frameworks are. Okay. And that's how we've historically approached the problem. But the business has rebelled, right? What the business says is, no, the friction's become too high, and I'm not going to listen to you. I'm going to find other ways around those inefficiencies so I can sell more jeans. And I go, so now we've got to the next level, which was a CISO that says, I can't secure the company. I have to protect the business. Now I have to negotiate with my lines of business as like I negotiate with my kids. Okay. They're not going to do what I say. So therefore, how do I encourage better behavior and have a conversation about how much risk they're willing to accept versus my ability to address the risk that I think they can't accept?
And we know how that works, right? It's not how you just lay the law of the land down. It's actually being a better role model for your children and in corporate America. If you go around acting, uncivilized, your peers are going to think you're crazy. Your boss might, fire you. Your direct reports are going to mirror your behavior, right? That's what happens with kids. They watch more than they listen.
Well, and this is, if we extend that analogy for a minute, I know I'm using a lot of analogies, but this is where, see, we get back to comorbid. See how the comorbid, right,
Mhm.
as a
Mhm.
phrase and the undermining of the role versus the realization of what the role is emerging to be, right, is why we're having this theme. And I said, so if you're willing to say, I have to protect the business and I can't secure the company, okay, and all my lines of business are in essence my kids and I'm a parent. Okay. Now the question is, what type of parent are you? Are you a helicopter parent, right? Am I trying to tell you what to do to make sure that you make it to be an adult in my eyes as how I see you being an adult, right? Or am I an experiential parent, right? Depending upon the kids, I'm going to give you flexibility. I'm going to tell you the stove is hot. Okay. And I'll try to prevent you from touching the stove, but I can't always be there. Some of those kids are going to touch the stove, right? And then I'm going to have to take them to the hospital and I'm going to have to make sure the burns are bandaged. But I'm going to remind you that you wanted, right, that flexibility. And therefore, there's an accountability that comes with the responsibility of accepting some risk. Okay. Or are you a Socratic parent, meaning does the business fundamentally understand the value of security, that it is a necessary component to a sale, okay, like a SaaS company, in which case we're having a very intellectual conversation about how much risk we want to have. And I'm not trying to convince you and I'm not trying to keep you alive. I really am having a conversation to say, we will make this company the best company it can be. It will grow as fast as it possibly can because what I've just done is transition now to say my job is to enable the business. My job is to maximize the sale of jeans. And now I'm not talking about security. So I go, so when you look at it that way, you see how the role of a CISO is transitioning, and you get to 80% are technical CISOs, 15% are cyber risk CISOs, and 5% you see the emerging that are the business enablement CISOs, right? That are now understanding how to have conversations with their sponsors inside the company. And it's all the
Yes.
different sponsors we talked about.
Yes, I love that. It makes me think, right, like, is the next gen CISO going to come from, is he gonna be formerly a CFO? It's gonna be a, operations guy. Um, Maybe just, will he be required to have an MBA or certain certifications? So, for context, I think one of the things that preceded this interaction that I had with you a couple of weeks ago was a post on LinkedIn by Sam Finn. Has a pretty interesting post that I shared with you. Traditional CISO roles are a thing of the past. And it's I think there's some different nuance between, I think this poster might be from the UK, and the macroeconomic conditions there versus the US, although we're starting to look a lot more like that. It moves the conversation beyond our CISO still relevant to a more accurate and uncomfortable question that we've been talking about here today. Are we structurally undermining the role we depend on the most? Right. So it sets up the need for a new model of governance, leadership, and performance intelligence. Right. It's like log files don't tell the whole story, they only tell how your systems are behaving. Systems and technology, in my view, and I've said this before, are a manifestation of the values and the principles and the beliefs of their owners. And I can kind of take a quick assessment of an organization's cybersecurity posture when you look at some of their financials and their budget, and their operating model for cybersecurity versus doing a very complex deep dive on their security infrastructure. So, if we kind of hit on this evolution of the CISO, right? Like, what is this next generation going to look like? And as the evolution, we hear a lot about CISOs needing to become more business savvy, have business acumen, be board ready, have quote unquote a seat at the table. What's your thinking right now, Steve? I mean, you've been there before. You're fairly fluent in business and accepted. You're not. Whenever I talk to you, I mean, it's like, I think you are very keen and aware of the business alignment need this role has, versus there are some CISOs that almost like a badge of honor. They're always so busy and, responding to compliance or, again, some other kind of technical issue of the day. So how do you see this role evolving, right, over time for the CISO to become maybe a better role model and citizen and leader that the business and stakeholders require of this role?
Yeah. Now, to answer that question, I've got to have some way of logically going through the process. And I go, well, I'm going to start with the phrase, the illusion of control through dashboards and frameworks. Okay. That is what we've put ourselves into. We measure success primarily as technical CISOs. Okay. Working for the CIO, it's about measurement. And yet what we want to use is the word metric. Okay. So we get confused. So I'm like, all right, instead of measuring, right, what percentage of my employees have taken security awareness training, or what percentage of my employees have fallen for phishing, or that I've got multi-factor authentication deployed to 99% of my population. Okay. I oftentimes, when I mentor a CISO, I'll say, so what is the one metric, security metric, that I guarantee that every employee in my company cares about?
The one metric to rule them all question.
What
Yeah.
is the one metric, right, that everybody cares about in my company? And I offer that, and then you'll hear people talk about, well, security awareness training. Has everybody been trained? Do we have identity and access management deployed everywhere, right? Do I have application security deployed? So what they're thinking about are the security controls, right? And how I am trying to protect the company, right, against attack. And they say, yeah. And that's why historically now, to your point, it's like we're not getting there. I go, the one thing that I used to talk about was, if I introduce this friction, security is a cost of doing business. It is a friction. Nobody will do it out of the goodness of their heart. It is a non-functional requirement on processes that are designed to be functional to deliver. I go, hey, if I talk to you, Steve, and I go, if you're willing, right, to put up with the friction of multi-factor authentication once a day, in return for that, it will probably stop 3 to 5 attacks a year that will be successful, that will cost me as a security team about $4 million in people, process, and technology to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. That $4 million in a $50 million company would have gone to your bonus.
So financial acumen, financial literacy, you're sitting down and having a conversation with the CFO instead of talking at the CFO. And the negotiation in that scenario is a centerfold, right? It's like a model for how CISOs should be able to communicate in terms of financial impact and negotiate as well, right? Which is, again, having a conversation versus dictating and, policy that can often backfire. And I think we're getting now into the section where we talk about the difference between business analytics and cybersecurity analytics, right? This whole notion that, the log files only tell a part of the story. So I just wonder, like, how do you look at and measure impact, right? Strategic performance, business performance versus just operating metrics. So, and then what would this look like if the CISOs were measured not just by defense, but by strategic impact?
Yep. So you heard me say business impact analysis, right? You've heard me talk about kids. And I used to say, look, I have 4 kids. I love all my kids. Okay. And at any point in time, any one of those individual kids is my favorite child. But the reality is there is a priority. Some kids are more important than others. Okay. Some kids, are going to take over the family business. They just have that acumen and you raise them differently, right? Through the processes. Others, you love them to death and they're good kids, but you wouldn't trust them, driving a car because it's just not going to happen. You know what I mean? Kind of thing. Over simplify. So what we're doing here, right, in this conversation is what's the business impact analysis? What is really important to this company, to the revenue or to the brand or whatever? Now, what we just did was a fundamental shift. And I said, when I worked at Levi's, and we went through this because we stopped going to the executive team and the board and saying, here's why security is important. Okay, look at how good I am at putting out the fire. And what we said was we will be evaluated metrics on the following things. 3 things that are important to the business to sell more jeans where cybersecurity has an impact. 1, we have to protect the brand. 2, we have to protect the workforce. And 3, we have to protect the supply chain. And we said that is what the business cares about because the Levi's brand is a $6 billion a year brand. You damage the brand. Oh, you want to get the company's attention? Absolutely. Protect the e-commerce site, protect consumer data. Okay. Protect the workforce. 80% of all successful attacks come through human compromise. They are the weakest link. Social engineering attacks, phishing attacks, right? Triple down. Well, the board and the executive team see that every day. They totally get it. And they were like, yep, we got it. And then I said, supply chain, if there's no jeans in stores, I don't care about any other process in this company, HR, finance. If there are jeans in my stores, I know I'm in business. So let's make damn sure, right, that we don't impact the supply chain. And that's both the manufacturing supply chain as well as the SaaS supply chain, how the business applications run. And I share this to everybody. I go, start there. Look at your company and look at yourself as a CISO or the security lead and say, what am I doing to protect the brand, to protect the people, and protect the supply chain? And make sure that every investment that you make in people, process, and technology addresses one or more of those 3, and everything else you throw out of the boat. It's irrelevant, okay? Because that is how you're now demonstrating direct business value to sell more genes.
I love that business value, the business value equation, the business impact assessment. I think most CISOs who have created an identity out of being a technical CISO and borderline on wanting to be an influencer, when you look at a lot of their streams online, is they're really leaning into the role of technical CISO, and it's unfortunate because they may be undermining their own chances of continuing their career success, right? Do you have a lot of Levi's? Like, do you have a favorite? Like, do you still wear the brand? And did you do a good job of protecting the brand and in your own future self as a customer?
So I will share this quick story. I wear 505s. Those are
Yeah.
I'm an old school straight leg 505 guy. Okay.
Yeah.
That's who I am. Right. So I wear them. Do I still wear them? I have to. I didn't realize I'm a brand ambassador for the rest of my life. If I go to a business meeting and I'm wearing a sports coat and a nice shirt and I don't have jeans on and I'm wearing nice pants, I get called out because they were like, "You worked at Levi Strauss. You must be wearing jeans. That brand is so important."
Yes.
So my wife's not too happy, right? Because I'm leaving the house and she's like, "You leave the house looking like that?" I go, "Because if I wear nice pants and I go somewhere, I get called out. Everybody's like, 'Wait a minute, that's the brand.'" Okay. So
Yes.
I
I love that.
chuckle from that perspective, going, "Yes, I'm a 505 and I have to be able to wear them." The other story I will tell you,
Mhm.
right, is look, when we transitioned at the executive team and came into the board to the audit committee and said, "Look, here's our security posture. Here's how we're being attacked. Okay. Here is how the larger industry is being attacked. Well, how is the world, how are the bad guys coming in? How are we specifically getting hit? And here are the three things that we're responsible for against those attacks to maximize the value of the security function to selling more genes." That actually, in 10 minutes, and I ran 12 minutes long, which you never do at a board meeting, resulted in a 15-minute conversation after that where the board simply said, "Steve, we get it now. We, as a board, that it's all about women selling jeans to women. That's all about fashion. Actually, it makes sense to us now for why cybersecurity has a role in selling more jeans." You actually made that transition to the business value proposition. Okay. Once that happened, okay, you don't ask for a seat at the table. You don't demand a seat at the table. What happened was you earned a seat at the table because now they understood the business risk and why. Okay. What you do is important to the company. That was the transition. And all of a sudden, right? And that's what I tell people is there will come a defining moment as a CISO that you are asked in front of the executive team. And in that 10 minutes is whether you're going to earn a seat at the table or be thanked and forever look from the outside in.
That's a very um, interesting observation. And one thing that I have said in the past, and just in a more general context around transformation, is I've often wondered, how could a person lead or contribute to digital transformation within their company or their business if they haven't themselves gone through some kind of transformation? To from tech, in leadership, it goes from being an individual contributor in a skill set based approach to one of values, right? It's what you believe and how you act, often, in those leadership roles, and in this case, earning your seat at the table versus demanding it. Very interesting mindset shift there that you don't see a lot of. You still see a lot of CISOs bemoaning the fact and almost insisting on their right, but it's not a CISO's right by virtue of having a C in their title, right? Um, Interesting. I like that. So I wonder, like, if your cybersecurity strategy vanished tomorrow, like, how do you reflect on how long would it take before the business noticed, in terms of like measurement of business impact and value? Um, do you see a need or a value in like the business metrics and the role they play, in real time, or quarterly updates or annual reviews, like compliance. Obviously, if you're going to do that, compliance is a different kind of a problem and not necessarily helping to sell more jeans. But other metrics can, right? How vital do those become in the business's operating model for them to make important decisions, either at the operating level or at the board level, at a strategic level?
Yeah. So let's talk about executive and board again, right? So as a CISO, if
Hmm.
you're coming there to demonstrate why your job is important or to demonstrate some measurement as to how you are being efficient in the use of the company's resources, that's yesterday's problem. You are now basically positioning yourself for obsolescence because what they want is to demonstrate that you are effectively managing the cybersecurity risks against the speed with which the business wants to grow. Okay. That's the difference. That's how you got to think about the problem. Now, if you do that, then I say, so do you want to go to the board every month or every quarter? The answer is you want to go there as little as possible. Same with the executive team, because what happens if you do your job well and your metric is well established, right? The squeaky wheel gets all the attention, right? You don't want to be a squeaky wheel. You want to come in where they want to simply do a verification, trust but verify, that you continue to have the best interest of the company in mind and that the way you're executing is still aligned with the business risk as they understand it and you understand it. And then you say thank you and they say thank you because they're going to move on to the bigger problems. And you don't want to be the bigger problem. So I oftentimes say the more time you're in front of them, that should be a key indicator that maybe while you may think you're doing a great job, you might want to go get some coaching, or you might want to, take a fresh look at how you are characterizing your security program, because this clearly is a case where less is more, right? And that's what I say is I needed to go see them, right, once a quarter or once a month, whatever, when they needed something from me. Because the other part is how often you need something from them. And that's an incident. Okay. And if you've got incidences every month and you're activating your incident response plan and you're in front of them all the time because you're trying to be able to put things back to bed, again, that's not a good thing. Okay. They want to know that when you come see them and you do it once in a blue moon, that you, right, can ruin their day. But that's a respect that you've earned where they understand when they see you. And the CFO told me this once, Steve, when I see you coming, okay, I don't know whether you're just here to say hi because we're passing or whether you're about to ruin my day because you have something that's going to require me to forget everything else I'm doing because now we're in the emergency room, okay? And I'm here to support you to keep the patient alive, to keep the company alive another day, okay? And where I go with that is as an executive for cybersecurity, realize when you've reached that level, you want to always have a smile on your face. You always want to be positive because if you're having a bad day, people know now, right, what it's like to be an emergency room doctor, okay? And that you may be having a bad day, okay, just because you woke up with a headache because you pulled a double shift. They're seeing you as, oh, Steve's coming and he doesn't look happy. Odds are bad things are about to happen, and they automatically start the cortisone rise, right? They're getting ready to go on defense. And that was one of the things I learned in these conversations was your demeanor on a daily basis. You got to be very aware, like every senior executive, right? Because people are reading more into what you're doing than just what you're thinking.
I'm a runner, Steve, as you know, and this race is going. It's called the Cocodona 250 in Arizona, and there's some early, the first and second, the top five, usually top 10, cross that finish line after 250 miles with smiles on their faces, with gratitude, and it makes you wonder, like, how can you do that? You just ran 250 miles, and it comes down to this: training, focus, dedication. You're there because you want to be, not because you have to be. And I think about that in terms of leadership as well. For those who are grumpy and got up on the wrong side of the bed, to me, it's like I think it indicates maybe a lack of training. I think that there's maybe a time and a place for the Grumposaurus attitude, but if you're there to be a model citizen and to be a leader, you need to train up your fluency and your skills and your behaviors so that after you cross that 250 proverbial miles, you still have a smile on your face and you're still leading like you've only ran 1 mile. I know it's hard to do, but to me, I, when I talk to CISOs, some of them I just get a lot of times I just get a cold shoulder. A lot of times CISOs won't even want to talk to me, but the ones that do, I feel have crossed that barrier from, technological obsession to humanistic flavored kind of leadership. And you made a interesting point about the incident response, right? In this conversation, and we're rounding third base here. We're heading for home, or hey, in the running world, we're on the last mile, right, of that 250-mile race, and we've talked about a couple of things, right? Identifying the lack of governance. The CISO role isn't dying; it's being rewritten. That was part of the undertone of what we offered in this webinar, in this conversation, and that it's our job to write it right. Um, and so, if we're using empowering performance measurements that aren't tied to incident response and looking at the business value metrics, I think we could be on the right path, right? And then looking at those performance in business metrics as business enabling, not a compliance tracker. So, starting with structure, leadership, not tools. You just got back from RSA. I'm sure most CISOs have, is the recommendation now you go to RSA like once every other year because the tech that doesn't change that often?
You bring up a good point, right? Which was the tech isn't changing that much. And
Hmm.
it's to your point, which was the CISO role is adapting. It's being rewritten as a profession. Okay. When's the last time that you've seen a profession emerge forward? Right? When is the last time you've seen the profession of doctor or lawyer or of equivalent? Okay. We're at this stage now where the profession of a CISO is separating from a CIO because the CIO really is an operating executive for business processes. Whereas a CISO now is starting to see legal and regulatory requirements where it's not about paying a fine because I didn't pass an audit, right? It's over time here, I'm potentially like a CFO, right? Or a lawyer, I'm going to go to jail if I don't keep the company legal. Okay. If I
Mm.
don't keep them above the line, SOX for the CFOs, right? For the lawyers themselves, all the laws about what's passed. Well, we're in that transitive stage where we've got a little bit of lawyer responsibility, a little bit of CFO responsibility, and a lot of doctor responsibility as to how the role operates because we don't control most of our destiny and can't. So, how do I sell insurance to the company and the lines of business that is an appropriate amount of insurance for the money that I have and position it in a way that my executive team, when they look at the metric for whether I'm successful or not, I've done a very good job of describing not how I'm practicing good security, but how security through a set of insurance policies is being adequately practiced to the business risk that the company wants to accept.
Yeah, I love that. Well, let's shift gears and wrap up here. I want to have more or less a reveal here of, let's add you back here. A reveal. This is the project I had last week while everybody was at RSA. I stayed home. I have been working on this book called The CISO on the Razor's Edge. This is not a sales pitch. It's not a vendor pitch. It is about 100 pages. Um, you do hear about performance metrics and what I have called strategic performance intelligence. And I think if you just put in parentheses, this is business metrics. How do we get CISOs through this mental model shift from technical metrics to business metrics? So the last question here, I don't see any coming in from the audience. So I want to, maybe just frame this. What I've tried to do in this book, and by the way, there's chapter 3, Steve. I've mentioned this to you that I've spent time writing about this question of the comorbidity of the comorbid poisoning of the CISO role. So thank you. You inspired an entire chapter in this book. I had fun writing that part, reflecting on, the dynamics of being reactive versus leading. And so the question I have to wrap up this session is, if the CISO role is being redefined anyway, why not lead that change instead of reacting to it? How can CISOs play a role in their own reinvention, if you will? And what would that look like to you or to your peers, Steve, as you think about this, state of evolution that the CISO role is in today?
Yeah. And the way I would say this is, the first thing you have to do is acknowledge you have a problem before you can solve the problem.
Hmm.
Okay. And as you said, the role of the CISO isn't dying, it's being rewritten.
Hmm.
And what we're trying to do, like with your book, which is really good, is it's giving the perspectives. It's going back to what is, the comorbid responsibility, so to speak, right? Why is it like this? What are all of the things that are changing in the profession that we are, as CISOs, now coming together as CISOs to define what the next generation of CISO role is for the industry and represent that forward. So it's not individual CISOs trying to establish their accountability, but as a practice now, we are coming forward and saying the profession requires that we operate this way because of a set of these comorbid circumstances. And now we're trying to make it positive, which was, how do we describe what a successful CISO looks like in the next 5 to 10 years, as we're all coming to appreciate that the way we were doing it is not appropriate for the way we must do it.
I love it. And by the way, at one point you made a note. I had been thinking about strategic performance intelligence as being more playing offense, but you've encouraged me, and I like this, to reframe it as, without it, you're quote unquote flying blind, or you might not have the right armor or the right view or perspectives, and that there is a way of looking at business analytics as a defensive layer as well as an offensive layer. So I spend a lot of time documenting, diagnosing, and then looking at the evolution and in the prescription of this in this book. I'd encourage you, if you want to read a sample chapter, you can download it at tout.media. The book launches on June 2nd. You can pre-order it. Currently, the Kindle version is available on Amazon, but there will be a print version as well. This session will be available as a replay on LinkedIn, but we're also going to parlay this into a podcast episode. So as we wrap up here, subscribe to that if you want to re-listen to it or take notes or share it with a friend or a colleague. I appreciate it, and thank you so much. Steve, as we wrap up, any final thoughts here you'd like to share?
One, thank you for giving me the opportunity to opine, and to hopefully to the listeners. Look, I told you what I know. I talked about what I think, but I leave you with this. You're now part of the solution, right? We are a security community. We all have an obligation as a shared responsibility to protect our businesses and each other. Okay. And so be part of the journey of not just defining what a CISO is, but defining what the security practice is. It's yours to own.
I love that advice. Steve Zalewski, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for your contribution, not only to this session, but the community and thanks you as well, and we appreciate that.
Absolutely.
All right, we're going to sign off. It's right at the top of the hour. Thank you everybody who attended, and we'll see you at the next session. Bye now.